Up next, Greg Bishop presents Flying Saucers and the Right Brain. What art can teach us about the Ufo Enigma?
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Smiles Lewis, and you are tuned into the 5th week of our Saturday Streamathon Emergency Fundraiser Series. Thank you for sticking with us through the fun, interesting technical difficulties. Our next guest is Greg Bishop, In 1991, he co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which was a journal of UFOs, the paranormal, conspiracy, psychedelia, and new science. His first book, Wake Up Down There, anthologized many of the articles and features. Greg's second book was Project Beta, which documented a government campaign of disinfo perpetrated against an unsuspecting researcher. His third book, Weird California, was released in 2006. He also wrote for the famed UFO paranormal site UFO Mystic for 5 years. It Defies Language, released in 2016, is a collection of essays on UFOs, the government, and fringe issues and personalities. His show, Radio Misterioso, at radiomisterioso.com, now in its 17th year, features interviews with fringe topic researchers and occasionally weird music. He also flies paragliders and is a licensed private pilot, as well as an aerial drone photographer. Please welcome my good friend, Greg Bishop.
I've been wondering recently, well, in the last year, what the right brain is doing during a UFO experience and after, because half of our existence and our thought and our being is not analytical. It's intuitive and artistic. And whether you think you have that in your mind or not, you do. We are all made that way. If you enjoy music or a movie or something like that, that's your right brain working, right? So I wondered, how can we apply this to UFO study? So let's go ahead. Oh, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. Miles already did it, but that book came out in 2000. It was a collection of my magazine. Wake Up Down There was the name of the book. Magazine of the Excluded Middle. There's Project Beta from 2006. I blog for that site with Nick Redfern mainly for most of the life of that site, UFO Mystic. I think you can kind of find it on archive.org now, but not all of it, because all of it, or the stuff that I liked that I thought was important, went into the book It Defies Language, which came out, holy crap, 4 years ago. I think maybe I'm due for another one, which I am working on. And then this came out in 2017, all these great writers talking about how to look at the UFO subject in a different way. And I think the embryonic version of what I'm going to talk about today was included in my essay in that one, which was about the co-creation hypothesis, something I'm still working on. So what are the left and right brain? Well, there we go. Analysis, logic, facts, math. The analytical side is the left brain. This is according to a theory which is pretty much accepted at this point. The right side of your brain deals with the stuff I talked about: creativity, intuition, art, creating art, emotions, feeling, imagination. That's all in your right brain. And the connection between the two allows them to communicate, the corpus callosum, which is the connection between the left and the right brain. And ufology is pretty much stuck right there in the left brain. I've got I'm going to switch between text and talking, which I like to do. A little bit I wrote about this slide. The left brain is where the scientific method resides. It's gotten us pretty far along in the study of UFOs, but we've hit a wall. All of this data only proves that there's something we cannot explain does exist, which it does. I'm pretty sure about that. There's been so many reports and been going on for so long. And, witnesses often have their entire lives changed in minutes. What else can do that? Trauma, a traumatic experience, and to a lesser extent, something that upends all of our previous assumptions about reality, like a UFO or a paranormal event. And so if we can look at this side of our brain and this side of the experience, perhaps we can move a little bit further in our understanding of the UFO Enigma, as it's called. I wrote something in 2007 called UFOs as a Cosmic Art Project, which was on the UFO Mystic site and appeared in It Defies Language. And this is a quote from it. Perhaps the reason we're not getting anywhere with ufology is we almost always choose to look at the problem from a perspective of society where science has answered most of our questions about our world and the universe. And it's a great tool, but it's not the only one in our box. We should look at others that may be just as valid, but not as obvious up to now. And for the past couple of years before this, I'd been giving a lecture called, this is also from my essay, called the 1950s UFO Contactees, Charlatans or Unrecognized Art Movement. What we have here, I hope you can see the pointer there. What we have here is some illustrations actually from contactees. This is from George Hunt Williamson's book. Oh, I can't remember the name of the book. Anyway, somebody will probably yell it out. That's supposedly the footprint of Orthon the Venusian that Georgia Dempsey encountered in the desert. And this is a diagram of one of the solar systems, or at least planetary systems, according to George Van Tassel. So in that essay, in the contactees, the unrecognized art movement, I discussed the activities of the contactees and how their output of writing, drawings, paintings, and artifacts could be considered creative ways to get a message across. So looked at in this context, it doesn't matter whether the inspiration comes from space people or their own imagination or a combination of the two, there's still a message there. A broad overview of the history of UFO sightings and contact can be examined in the same way, but the problem becomes what the message, if any, could be. But most people, at least of those of us interested in the subject, would say that aliens are here and have been visiting us since at least the 1940s. Some go further and insist that these aliens are intimately interested in our politics, religion, and even our DNA. Of course, none of this has been proven in a way that most of the human race would accept as unquestionable proof. That leaves us where ufology is today. It's not changed basically in 60 years. It's the same. That's a long time for something to remain unanswered. Especially something as ubiquitous and worldwide as UFOs. But the problem is, maybe we just choose to look at it from the perspective of a society where science has answered all our questions. So what else could we possibly look at? So let's look at art. This is a quote from Piet Mondrian, who was a Dutch artist of the early 20th century. I thought this was a great quote. Art is higher than reality and has no direct relation to reality. Sound familiar? To approach the spiritual in art, one must make as little use as possible of reality, because reality is opposed to the spiritual. And I'll talk a little bit about the spiritual and religion later in the talk. We find ourselves in the presence of an abstract art. Art should be above reality, otherwise it would have no value for man. So I changed the quote and replaced art with UFOs. UFOs are higher than reality and have no direct relation to reality. Stay with me here. To approach the spiritual in UFO study, one must make as little use as possible of reality, because it is opposed to the spiritual. We find ourselves in the presence of an abstract phenomenon, UFOs. UFO study should be above reality, otherwise it would have no value for man. There's a little bit of bombast engaged in here, but I think you get my point. Let's look at it from the perspective of seeing differently, or as an artist would see it, or as our right brain would see it, how it affects us emotionally and subconsciously, like a piece of music or an artwork or a movie or a TV show. Here's a funny cartoon that I always like to show, showing that if we look at things in a context that we're used to or comfortable with, we would probably never see beyond our own personal space, our own civilization, our own preconceived ways of thinking, and we have to change that a bit. Let me explain a little bit about the co-creation hypothesis, which is something I've been pushing for a while. It is now in no way unique to me. It's just that I've been sort of looking at it for a while. So let's talk about that for a little bit. And one of the main things about the co-creation thing is we don't perceive things. The things we perceive are like what they are, not what they are, because they're coming through our senses and our memory and all those other things that make up what we are as biological entities and thinking beings. So we're looking at everything at one remove or more from whatever that might be. I think most of us can agree on that. And here's a nice quote I always like to show too. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. Exactly. Here's another quote I like to bring up. I had this guy, John Fenderson, on my show a few years ago on Radio Mysterioso. and he sent these. This isn't a picture of what he sent up, but it is a picture of those Chinese lanterns that have a candle in them and they go and float. He and his friends, sometime in I believe the 1970s or 80s, did the old dry cleaning bags with the candles in them and sent up, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 of them, and waited to see what the reaction was. And he said there were calls into the police station and radio shows and all that. I'm sorry, media saying everything from who sent up all those things with candles in them to there's a fleet of UFOs flying over the city. And because of this experience, he told me this on the show: most of what you're seeing, you're actually imagining, and consists of what you're filling in based on patterns you expect. When something happens that you don't expect, very often you won't see it at all. Or I would add, fill in details, which is what may be going on with the UFO experience. In fact, I'm almost sure of it. This book by Joe McMoneagle, one of the first remote viewers, I think the first remote viewer, came out in the early to mid 90s. I can't remember the exact year, but he had a model in there of perception. And basically what he said is our perception is based on a series of subconscious or below conscious decisions that we made before it even gets to our conscious awareness. We constantly reside and operate in a constantly fluctuating past of our own creation. By the time our processing is of any use to us, when it becomes conscious, we're already dealing with past events. Our reality is one we in fact invent or make up as we go. This is Donald Hoffman. I've brought him up in a few talks. He's a professor of cognitive science at UC Irvine and the author of a book entitled Visual Intelligence, How We Create What We See. He's written another one after this that goes a little bit more into detail about his theories. What he did was propose an evolutionary model of perception that says humans have developed a sense of reality that is rooted in our survival rather than in the reality of what is there. In other words, our ways of seeing it have not evolved to see things as they are, but to see things in a way that ensured fitness for the species, to help us survive, to eat, to reproduce, all those things. And he did kind of amazing thing. He took a whole bunch of facts about evolution, you know, what kind of species, where they live, what the environment's like, the availability of food, mating habits, survivability of offspring, all these things, and turn them into equations. Then he took these equations and ran them through a computer with real world data to see if the models worked. Once he was satisfied that the models worked, he ran simulated scenarios of evolutionary development and survivability. And what he found was that, and this is a quote from him, he said, across thousands of simulated trials, fitness for survival trumped reality in every case. Meaning, no matter what happened in the creature's outside world, in the simulation, the ones that saw things that helped them survive actually survived better, that saw things that were actually real in their environment. They all saw only those that saw only what was best for their survival beat out the rest that saw reality as it was, or partially as it was. That's the rest of his quote. That to me is fascinating. And we have to keep that in mind as we're looking at the UFO subject. I mean, are we seeing what we have to see? Are we seeing what we think we need to see, or what is actually there? And who knows what that could be? This is another little illustration to show you what's going on. He used this in one of his lectures. I think he did a TED Talk where he used this lecture. You ought to check it out. It's pretty fascinating. If a lion sees a steak, it sees the steak. I mean, it's something it needs to eat. But if the lion's not hungry and looking to mate, it probably won't even recognize that there's a steak sitting there, because it's not important to it right then. And for a rabbit, it makes no sense at all. Rabbits don't eat steak. They probably won't even notice that it's there, because it is not important to their survival. He also did this amazing thing, which is another illustration I like to bring up to make this more obvious. What he did was he compared our sense of the world to a computer desktop. What's on the computer desktop represents what's on what is important to us. Those folders you see on that desktop, all these little folders here, and documents and all that, represent what is in the computer, but not the computer itself. Like those aren't all the hard drive and memory and all that stuff. That's the reality of the computer. But we don't see any of that. All we see is this desktop that shows us what we need to know. And so, you know, his quote is, it's not there to, yeah, here's his quote. What Hoffman said was, reality is like a 3D desktop that's designed to hide the real world and guide adaptive behavior. The desktop is not there to show us the reality of the computer. It's there to hide the reality, these things here. And that's that's the model I'm sort of working with here with the co-creation idea. We're not seeing things as they are. We're seeing things as they are useful to us. A little bit more. This article is from 2010. Let me read a little bit. The phenomenon of faulty memory and perception is so common that lawyers and judges, even lawyers and judges, are starting to place less emphasis on witness testimony. And this is for events we all agree happen every day, like assaults and murders. In this January 2010 article in Scientific American on witness reliability, the author said, the uncritical acceptance of eyewitness accounts may stem from a popular misconception of how memory works. Here's an important thing. Many people believe that human memory works like a video recorder. The mind records events and then on cue plays back an exact replica of them. On the contrary, psychologists have found that memories are reconstructed rather than played back each time we recall them. The act of remembering is more akin to putting puzzle pieces together rather than retrieving a video recording. Even questioning by a lawyer can alter witness testimony because fragments of the memory may unknowingly be combined with information provided by the questioner, leading to inaccurate recall. I suppose that reminds you of something, UFO investigators, possibly. Here's another article from 2010. The author talked to a neuroscientist at McGill University in Montreal, Karim Nader, who said the very act of remembering causes errors to creep into our recall. Here's a quote from the article. It may be impossible for humans or any other animal to bring a memory to mind without altering it in some way. Nader thinks it's likely that some types of memory, such as flashbulb memory, he calls it, are more susceptible to change than others. Memories surrounding a major event like September 11th might be especially susceptible, he says, because we tend to replay them over and over in our minds and in conversation with others, with each repetition having the potential to alter them. Nader and his colleagues have termed this memory reconsolidation. Recalling this experience to other people may allow distortions to creep in. As he says, when you retell it, the memory becomes plastic, and whatever is present around you in the environment can interfere with the original content of the memory. He suggests that this might be a coping mechanism that the brain uses to make a memory useful rather than accurate. We have to remember that. When people are remembering things, especially traumatic things or startling things or things they have no reference for, the brain is trying to figure out how to make that memory useful to you in the future, not recalling details of exactly what happened. Here's another part of the co-creation thing I like to talk about. John A. Wheeler was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. He coined the term and the idea, well, I think it was totally his, but which is something he called the participatory anthropic principle, which from the name, you could probably tell what that means. And this is the basis of information theory, which fascinates me. And I will tell you why. Information theory studies the quantification of information. In 1990, this is when Wheeler proposed this. It was near the end of his life. John Archibald Wheeler, who worked on the Manhattan Project and the hydrogen bomb, said he was beginning to suspect that what we experience in reality is directly and intimately connected to our observation of it, which he termed the participatory anthropic principle. In a simplified form, this is a theory that all physical things arise from a background of infinite possibilities and are only quantified when they are observed. He called this the it from bit idea, meaning reality from bits of information. So, you know, at the very basis of reality is that is pure information, and the act of us experiencing it, interacting with it, thinking about it, causes matter to come into existence. Otherwise, it just remains pure information. And as one researcher told me when I discussed this, he said, in a physical universe, UFOs are totally strange, and Bigfoot, and you know, and ghosts, all these things, to certain extents. But in an informational universe, they're totally normal because we're creating things out of information, and that's fascinating to me. Here's another, a little more of a thought experiment, a philosophical experiment called Mary's Room. Philosopher Frank Jackson wrote a well-known essay, well-known amongst philosophers and philosophers of science, especially. The essay was called "Epiphenomenal Qualia," in which he discussed a hypothetical scientist named Mary, who's locked in a windowless room and can only gather information about the outside world through a sophisticated set of scientific instruments. Meaning she's just sitting in this room and she's got cameras or whatever, showing her the outside world. This is actually from the essay. Mary is a brilliant scientist who is, for whatever reason, forced to investigate the world from a black and white room via a black and white television monitor. She specializes in the neurophysiology of vision and acquires, let us suppose, all the physical information there is to obtain about what goes on when we see ripe tomatoes or the sky, or use terms like red and blue and so on. She discovers, for example, just which wavelength combinations from the sky stimulate the retina and exactly how this produces, via the central nervous system, the contraction of vocal cords and expulsion of air from the lungs that results in the uttering of the sentence, "The sky is blue." But what will happen when Mary is released from her black and white room and given a color, or is given a color television monitor? Well, will she learn anything or not? What Jackson was proposing is that our senses and somehow the information and how the information is processed by our brains convey an entirely separate experience of the physical world than any amount of quantitative data can hope to convey. He theorizes that a complete experience of the physical world is not possible by simply measuring it. When Mary's released into the outside world, will she know all there is to know about the physical world as experienced by her senses simply by collecting all the information she can beforehand? I don't think so. Our impressions of our surroundings are not completely described by the qualitative data that can be gathered by instruments that are basically refined versions of our senses, just like UFO data that's sitting in databases all over the world. The act of smelling a flower or hearing the crash of the surf, for example, cannot be perfectly described in language or numbers. The best that pure information can hope to achieve is an approximation. The popular reply to the question of Mary's room is that Mary gains a new acquaintance with what she already knew. But in our case, how do we gain acquaintance with something that doesn't even adhere to our standards that are familiar from our pre-experience room, our everyday waking life? How do we do that? Unfortunately, it's provided by popular culture, UFO investigators, books, TV shows, etc. And that, to me, contaminates the database of pure experience. Before we have an experience of the paranormal UFOs, we're all in Mary's room. So I look at the witness or the experiencer as an artist who now has to communicate that which cannot be put into words, at least not exactly, because English is very good if you want to describe something technical or precisely. If you want to describe something emotional or artistic or whatever, it's the experience of, you know, as in Mary's room. If you want to describe something outside that room, what do you do? How do you describe that? And the language limits us. I think we can agree that you can only describe what the words can allow you to describe. And so a lot of witnesses actually say, I can't really put it into words. And then they try to, and they're already changing their memories, right? Because they're trying to describe it in words that will fit vaguely what happened to them. So I look at the experience of the paranormal as an information-rich event that the mind organizes into its version of reality, not the reality that was there, not the computer behind the desktop, but what we see as our version of what is real and what is possible. And with the UFO thing, that is limiting, I believe. One method that was used was by Bigelow Aerospace during their BAS program, in which they concluded that the UFO phenomenon was a lot more than nuts and bolts machines that interact with military aircraft, as we've seen recently. But one of the major successes of BAS was in adopting the novel approach of utilizing the human body as a readout system, meaning not just a description of what's going on, but what happened to the person physiologically and maybe psychologically, not just, what did you see? And they were led to this because just in many UFO cases, multiple eyewitnesses frequently reported seeing widely different events. I think that's a good indication that there's something going on, that that there's a wide hole in our understanding of how we witness the UFO phenomenon and how witnesses communicate it. I thought this quote from Keith Thompson's book Angels and Aliens from 1993 was amazing. Many UFO witnesses emerge from their sighting experience or close encounter with a surrealistic appreciation that the world is filled with enormous vistas and abysses, meaning their perception of reality just stretched so far that they're desperately grasping for a new version of reality that can include something like a UFO sighting. And the closer to the person, the more disconcerting and affecting, negative possibly effects on your life and your psyche it can have. So let's get back to the right brain, intuitive, artistic thing, and why it's important to the UFO subject. And as we've just seen here, reality exists in our minds and nervous systems and memories, not what's out there. Cameras, video, and other instruments are extensions of our senses, not independent conscious witnesses to reality. They're not. And people count on that when they have a video or a photo or something like that of whatever their sighting was. Actually, I was talking about this with a friend of mine, and I said, I think video and photos of UFO experiences are not the experience. In fact, they narrow the experience and they provide no proof of what was going on except that something happened. The fact that you have that photo means you keep going back to that photo as a reference for yourself. Everything else that happened, the things you were feeling, what was going on around you, what your friend said, all of that is now going to be subservient to that photo or video. And I think that's a problem. During trauma or faced with an unfamiliar situation or both, the mind and memory will fill in details or even an entire experience. Meaning, something happened, but in our desperation to find something we can live with as a memory, details will be filled in. I mean, that's why I brought up the thing about reconstructed memories and in the court. This is important. We're subject to our language, our culture, and our genetics. All these things are working to provide input to our memory and our experience, our memory of our experiences. And like I said, people who have extraordinary experiences have their lives changed forever. It's not too many things that can do that, except for sometimes art, music, things like that. And you can't just put these in these things in a database. These are things that have to be found out by people going out and talking to people and kind of staying out of their way when they're describing what's going on. Probably the best person to do a UFO investigation would be somebody that has nothing to do with ufology. And as I say, the effect of a piece of music, a movie, or book or painting exists as a reality in our psyches, just like a dream. And these things can be referenced when something weird happens. What can your brain starts scanning your entire experience for something that will make sense, and that can come from anywhere. So let's talk about artists. How do they see, and how do they teach us to see certain things, and what does that teach us about how we see the outside world, the world outside of our brains or whatever, outside of our skin as opposed to the inside of it. Plus, I have a degree in art history, so I like to talk about this stuff. This is one of my favorite paintings, the Annunciation, one of my favorite subjects for paintings, not because I'm religious, just because I'm fascinated by the subject. I did actually write about this at UFO Mystic. It was, I think the essay was, Are UFOs a Cosmic Art Project? It's a subject that was treated by many Italian Renaissance artists, specifically the moment when an angel is telling Mary she will become pregnant with Jesus. And I think it's a good example of left and right brain dichotomy and synthesis. The composition is centered emotionally and physically in the space between the outstretched hands. What I mean by left brain, right brain synthesis is that it is using a very logical and ordered language, visual language, to describe something that is spiritual and ineffable. The composition is centered emotionally and physically in the space between the outstretched hands. The vanishing point of the lines on the floor and the tiles lead right to it. Like if you follow these vanishing points, it's like right there. A variety of concentric circles outlined by Mary's body and the angel's wings and the drapery that their clothing are all like bullseye leading to the center. I think what Botticelli was trying to do was entrain, entertain, teach, inspire, and enlighten the viewer as to what the Catholic Church wanted them to think about and believe. And you know, what was around them? Paintings. They didn't have movies. They didn't have really anything to, you know, teach people visually. But painting could do that. That's what was available then. Oh, I wanted to point this out. When Miguel Romero was doing the cover for Reframing the Debate, he was trying to figure out, you know, first he said, well, I want to have a reframe, like somebody's framing something, like a film director. And when I looked at that and saw what he was doing, I was immediately reminded of this painting. And he's saying, I'm not exactly sure how to do the rest. I mean, he had these things, but he said, you know, I'm kind of stuck on this background here. And I said, well, how about, you know, something like this? I looked at this as an incredibly great example of graphic design. And Miguel took that and put these crosswords in the background, almost like radiating concentric circles. And I had a lot of fun working with him on this. I mean, you know, it's 95% his idea, but I wanted you to see how some old piece of artwork became the cover of a UFO book, and how that really delighted me when I saw what he had come up with. Claude Monet, I'm sorry, painted a series of the cathedral at Rouen, France. Oh, I've got 20 minutes, so I'll speed it up here. And he spent 2 years and he rented a studio across the street. I think he did about 30 paintings in an attempt to illustrate the importance of light in our perception of subject. This on the right here is actually the cathedral as a photographic representation, and this is at afternoon light, during fog, during I'm sorry, like sunset, afternoon daylight. He's trying to represent in a flat surface in paint what the experience of sitting in front. That's why it's called Impressionism. The experience of seeing that cathedral in different lights. I think he also did this with the water lilies, his famous water lily paintings. Picasso, of course. I can't remember why I read this, but it's the idea was that Picasso is creating caricatures of people, basically. We create characters of reality when faced with an unfamiliar input. I'm wondering if the ideas we have about UFOs and what we think of as aliens are a caricature, because a caricature is a rendered image showing the features of its subject in a simplified or exaggerated way. for an artist through sketching or pencil strokes or other artistic methods. And in literature, a caricature is a description of a person using exaggeration of some characteristics and oversimplifications of others. I think we may be doing that with the alien thing, with and even what we see as technological UFOs. I just like this painting by Remedios Varo, a surrealist artist who lived in Mexico. She moved from Spain, I believe, in the 1940s or 30s. This is called The Creation of the Birds. And the symbolism in it is kind of amazing to me. It's not communicating. This is an example of something that can't communicated, verbally, even though I'm going to try to do it. It is a bird-like being making drawings, like an artist, of birds. And it, whatever it is drawing these birds, and they're taking flight off the paper. But it's using some kind of distilled paints and pigments, and using a pencil or a pen or a brush that is connected to a little violin in its chest, like, maybe bird songs come from there as an inspiration. And then there's light, this divine or celestial light coming from outside and shining on the paper. And all these elements go into creating what we think of and what we experience and what moves us as a bird. That's an amazing painting. I actually have to thank Miguel Romero for showing me that too when we were in the art museum in Mexico City. This is a painting from 1928 by Charles Demuth. Demuth, and it's based on a painting by the American poet William Carlos Williams. Williams, there's the poem there. His poetry is deliberately straightforward, but the painting is complicated. You really must know the poem to decode the painting. The setting is a tunnel-like street, which is flanked by sidewalks and buildings. Different way of seeing. Much of this backdrop is gray and black, but for the illuminated shop windows, and except for the illuminated shop windows and globular street lamps, the fire engine dominates the middle of the composition. And although its form is abstracted, we recognize it by its red color. We can see the truck's ladder on the right. We can see a long bar stretches across the bottom, which resembles an axle with two wheels, or sirens maybe. The little curved lines that radiate from those sirens or wheels can indicate sound or motion or both. These little lines right here. Another way of seeing. This I just learned of recently, an Ojibwe artist from Canada, Norval Morisseau. He wrote there's a book on his art called Return to the House of Invention. He says that he imagines dreams or is told by a spiritual guide. He has shown every color that has existed or ever will exist. And then he brings them forth into his paintings. And his quote, he believes these paintings will help people and help the world. He says these colors will be a medicine for the people. That's just a beautiful painting. I really like it. So, what are we to make of artistic or at least some sort of renditions of people's UFO experiences? I mean, the person that sent this to the British Ministry of Defense, here's the quote from them. I've developed contact with these craft and their energy forces, but unfortunately the designs I'm perceiving are too complex for me to draw. These include anti-gravitational fields that allow the craft to access time. Now, if you look at that thing, you can look at it as an exact representation, but I don't think that that's what the person that drew this was saying. In fact, why are there Ankh symbols at the top? The Egyptian Ankh, the symbol of life. I think there's far more going on here than looking at a technological device. And I think that is echoed. Almost looks like an airship. It looks like it has propellers there. I just noticed that now. Here's another way of seeing. I think this is fascinating. It's a map drawn in the 19th century by a Plains tribe on buffalo hide, and this is a river going through here, and what's around it are representation of who lives along the river and what's there. This tribe and how many people are there and what they do and what their ceremonies are like. There's a group of houses or dwellings when you get here. It's a different way of seeing things, but it is produced by humans. So it's kind of amazing, and in a non-Western type culture too. These are all from a book, because I think called Drawings from the National Archives, UFO Drawings for the National Archives, I believe, edited by Andy Clark. Came out 2 years ago or so. This guy said he saw something rising up through the clouds, and he didn't, he tried to represent it as a painting, and you'd see that it's lighting up the cloud there. There's the moon and Venus over to the left. He saw it over the top. You can even see a glint of the light hitting the roof of the building he was looking at. This is by my friend Susan Demeter. This is not something I believe that she saw physically, but she saw, I hope I'm not wrong if Susan's watching, she saw in her mind's eye as something that's important to her. And that her quote was, asked her about the painting. She said, "I just sort of empty my mind and will let whatever flow through. And I state only the positive." She sees this as a female entity that is sort of a guide for her. This was sent to me by Regan Lee. She said she saw this at age 3 or 4 in Los Angeles, actually right near where I live, in the late 1950s. Here's the quote. She actually wrote this note on the back when she sent it to me. "It was very late at night and very dark. I looked out through the French doors to see this creature standing there. He or it was messing around with what I thought was our hose. I remember being angry at this thing. I was mad he was in our yard using our thing. He saw me and it was so malevolent. He pointed the hose at me, and it turned out it wasn't the garden hose, but some kind of wand or gun type thing. It was almost cartoonish. His eyes were glowing red. I couldn't see his face, just those red eyes. He was very angry. I'd see him. I remember just screaming my head off." She's also had other UFO and missing time incidents up to the present time. Now, if she described that to you in language, that would not be what you see there. Everybody looking at this would have a different idea about what she described. And so to me, it's important that a witness like this may draw something for you that can't be communicated in language. I think I'm just going to put Peter Stitchberry up here because I really like his art. Here's another way of seeing. He did this portrait of Paul Benowitz. It doesn't look like Paul Benowitz whatsoever. But if you know what happened to him, that's what you might imagine he would look like. He does not look like a happy person. He looks very, he is not at ease. The great title for this one, that doesn't look anything like Ringo Swan. But the title tells you what's going on. Ringo Swan remote viewing the far side of the moon. And he also did a series of famous UFO photos. That one's called Bowlin 1966, which is, I guess, when that picture was taken. So what have we got here? A little less than 15 minutes. We got what? 13 minutes, or I'm sorry, 17 minutes. Not even 17. Anyway, so if the UFO phenomenon is an artist, what's it trying to communicate to us? Some things. You are special. Maybe you are. How about you're not special? Everything you know is wrong, meaning, you know, your world is turned upside down. You don't know everything. Hold my beer. I just thought of that as a joke, but sure, why not? Or simply just look, you know, without any interpretation upon what somebody is seeing. You know, maybe that's what's going on. Everything else that flows from a sighting or an experience comes from this initial impression. I've given talks at MUFON and a couple other places, and while I was there, I proposed that when a UFO investigator goes out to talk to a witness, they, instead of sitting down with them saying what happened and taking notes, they take a box of colored pencils, crayons, colored chalk, you know, watercolors, and some paper, and say, here, whatever happened to you, use these things, and I'll come back in a couple days or a week or whatever, and then you can give these things back to me. If you want to talk about it at that time, then great. I think that that what would happen is that our experience, not our experience, but our idea of UFOs would grow quite a bit if this was done. I just think it'd be a great experiment. I had somebody actually call me recently, and he wanted to describe the experience to me. And actually, I let him do it, but I tried to get him at first to just say, "Can you just give me a drawing of what you experienced?" He was actually a pilot. I met him through another pilot who works with him. Actually, my instructor, my private pilot instructor, he flies cargo, and this is one of the people he works with. And I said, "Could you please draw me a picture of what happened rather than describe it to me?" But he just really wanted to describe it to me, so I let him do it. But he is going to send me a drawing of it. But I think if you could get to somebody before they had started telling the story too much, especially to UFO investigator, there might be some clues about the phenomenon that comes out of that. I'm not sure, but I think it might be valuable. I'm almost done. I'm going to end with a couple of quotes. This one's from Whitley Strieber. And this could be the entire talk here. I know all of this sounds fictional. Of course it does. He's talking about his visitor experiences. I don't think it is, though. I think I'm describing things that we will see and understand more clearly as we draw closer to the visitors and thus to our own real place in the world, which makes sense to me because I think that a UFO investigator has to know why they're involved in the subject in the first place, because that will determine what they find. If you've already got the question in your mind, that determines your answer. So, in an attempt, I think people that are into investigating things should keep themselves out of the picture and also out of interpreting as much as possible, if that's possible. This was just published, and this has to do with religion and science. This was an article by Hossein Agrama, who's a professor of anthropology at the University of Chicago. The essay, the paper was called "Secularity, Synchronicity, and Uncanny Science: Considerations and Challenges" in the Zygon Religion Journal of Religion and Science. Highly placed, and he's talking about, I think, Diana Pasolka's book here. Highly placed aerospace engineers and physicists have looked into the esoteric practices of saints and psychics to help develop advanced propulsion concepts. UFOs powered by prayer and meditation. What kind of science is this? Is it religion instead? What do saints and psychics have to do with aerospace engines? The strain in imagining how these might mesh is yet another indication of how we still live in a secular age. But it also shows how the UFO phenomenon seems to dislocate and even undo the differences between scientific and religious knowledges so crucial to our secular understandings. Its uncanniness stretches us to the limit. And I think we should stretch that even further and include the artistic process in that definition. So, what can we conclude from all this gobbledygook I have spewed at you up to this point? If we listen and carefully study the witness experience as it is described or drawn, we may get clues about the thing in itself, where the UFO experience comes from. I've been saying this in interviews. I think the most important question is, where do UFO reports come from? Not where do UFOs come from, but what causes the reports? And that opens up a whole lot of other questions, as I've discussed here in this talk. And I just said, we have to abandon our preconceptions of what we may find and not filter for our own biases. The witness is already filtering and trying to make sense of what was seen and felt. This is also part of the idea of the body's human readout device. It's not a physical transformation or injury we're looking for. It's a change in the psyche, whether subtle or profound. And you can't find this by walking out to somebody's house with a pad and paper, writing everything down and leaving. You have to talk to the person, ask them what happened beforehand, what happened after. Go back a week or two or a month or a year later. Become friends with the person, or at least a confidant, and find out as time goes on how their experience changes, or if more things come to the front of their memory, or affects them to the point where they say, "Hey, I never really realized this." But I think that a lot of insight into the UFO experience comes through that kind of relationship. By looking at all this anecdotal, right brain transformational, oblique, and even poetic data, I think we may get clues as to the stimulus that causes UFO and abduction reports. But it will take a special kind of researcher and research to collate this information. It is not It is not something that just everybody can do. I think it's somebody that is not stuck in either of those camps, either an artist or a scientist. Find somebody who's very comfortable in both and have them go out and talk to UFO witnesses. I think that would be pretty amazing as well, and might move us forward a little bit. Maybe not in the direction we'd expect or even like, but it will move us in a different direction. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg. Intriguing as always, and lots to think about. I do. It's weird. I feel like skeptics have, for a long time lamented, so much of UFO reports or paranormal reports are misidentifications, hallucination, what have you. But as you mentioned, you reference, I'm going to get his name wrong, but it always reminds me of somebody. The guy who's like, our perception is not inaccurate. Our perception is not the meal. It's a menu. It's
Hoffman.
Not the meal.
Donald Hoffman, you mean?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I know for a lot of skeptics, they think, oh, well, that's old hat, but it's like, no, it really hasn't been absorbed. And as we've learned so much about how it can be affected, how much perception can be affected by very small aspects of the environment and our own preconceived ideas, it really, to me, it shifts how we really need to look at these things. And I think that's really like what you're getting at.
Yeah, definitely.
We just got a lot of positive response, obviously, from your talk.
That's nice. I never know how I come across. I really don't. I love it when people critique or say you could do this better, because it always helps. I don't know how I'm communicating. I think I communicate well enough, but there's always ways to improve. So yeah, let's have it with the questions, critique, expansion. Got a few minutes.
Let's see. Mostly just, applause.
Why, thank you.
And other just thank yous and whatnot. I'm not sure what Red Pill's saying.
He's telling people to be safe and wash their hands.
Okay. Well, I mean, duh. More applause.
This is not a hard-edged thing. I mean, I can't just go in and say, we got to do it this way, because that's not how this stuff works. That's not how art works. I was talking to Shannon Taggart the other day, and she was talking about how paranormal psi research never happens on demand. And what I said to her after we talked for a while is, and this can apply to the UFO subject, when you try to pin it down to something, it runs away from you. The minute you say it's this thing, it says, okay, fine, you have no idea what's going on, and it runs away. And it doesn't come back to help you. You have to be open. You have to be open to input that's completely confusing or doesn't fit in with your agenda,
Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Greg, and more importantly, for your friendship. We've known each other since the '90s and the zine scene.
91 or 2, a long time, Miles.
Yeah.
You're one of my best friends. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and always fascinated by what you're doing, who you're meeting, and people may not realize this. Shh, it's secret. Greg has a lot of great friends, so.
It's not a secret. Everybody has to have great friends. It's the only way to get through life and make it interesting.
Well, I mean,
like Miles and everybody else speaking here.
I mean, interesting people in the field, but yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, yes. Excellent, Greg. Thank you so much. And we'll be talking soon.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, folks, you can go to itdefieslanguage.com or radiomisterioso.com, and you should always tune in to his Radio Misterioso radio show, as well as Stop Hitting Yourself, his weird music show, because, of course, he has crazy taste, and I love it. I love hearing all the fun, weird stuff that he's into. So coming up next, here we go with